Welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to pry open the black box of the oil industry. We are going to trace the absolutely fascinating journey of a single molecule, literally from deep underground all the way into your home. It's this wild journey of chemistry, economics, and history, and it shapes our modern world in ways you probably don't even realize. Let's get right into it. So let's ground ourselves right off the bat. Take a quick look around your house. What do toothpaste, the asphalt in your driveway, and the 4th century possibly have in common? Well, the answer is oil. We rely on it every single day, right? But the story of how it actually gets into those everyday items is way older and honestly a lot more complicated than you might think. Believe it or not, we can actually trace oil extraction all the way back to the 4th century in China. Early innovators were literally using simple bamboo poles to drill wells for this dark, sticky fuel. But it wasn't until 1862 that we saw the very first atmospheric distillation, which is really just a fancy way of saying they boiled the oil to separate it into kerosene and diesel. From there, the 1930s really kicked off the modern era, especially with the huge 1939 expansion of the Ponca City refinery. That sparked this massive 20th century petrochemical innovation boom, largely driven by World War II, where we figured out how to completely restructure these molecules to make high-performance fuels and synthetic materials. All right, moving into section 1, not all crude is equal, the 150-plus grades of oil. Okay, so let's start by establishing a fundamental truth here. Raw crude oil is not just one single uniform thing. It's a highly complex matrix made up of hundreds of different hydrocarbon molecules, all mixed together. You can kind of think of crude oil fresh out of the ground like a highly volatile, unbaked mixture of raw ingredients. In its natural state, it's actually hazardous and practically useless for industrial stuff. The lighter elements can even form explosive vapors, which is exactly why you can't just toss raw crude straight into your car's engine. It has to be baked, or more accurately, refined. To sort through all these unbaked ingredients, the industry relies heavily on a metric called API gravity. Basically, this is just a measure of density. It tells us whether a specific batch of crude oil has a higher or lower boiling range. And why does that matter? Well, because boiling is exactly how we separate the oil. If a refinery knows the API gravity, they know exactly how much heat and effort they're going to need to extract the different fractions or parts of that specific batch of crude. And this brings us to the industry's ultimate dividing line. On one side, we've got the highly desirable light and sweet crude. This stuff has low density, it flows easily, and it has less than 0.5% sulfur. It is essentially the premium, super easy to refine stuff. But on the exact opposite side, we have heavy and sour crude. This stuff is incredibly stubborn. It's thick, it's carbon-heavy, high in sulfur, and it requires way more time, a ton of energy, and some seriously complex machinery to process. Which brings us to section 2, inside the oil refinery, the high-tech kitchen. Now that we know our raw ingredients, let's step inside the refinery to see the chemical magic that actually extracts value from this crude. The physical transformation follows a very strict chronological process. Step 1 is separation. The oil is heated up in a massive distillation column. The lighter fractions, the ones with lower boiling points, rise to the top, while the heavy, thick stuff falls right to the bottom. Step 2 is conversion. This is where we literally crack heavy, less valuable molecules and force them into lighter, high-value ones. Step 3 is treatment, which purifies the streams by pulling out unwanted junk like sulfur and metals. And finally, step 4 is blending. This is where they carefully mix the various streams together to create specific products that hit very strict quality and safety regulations. And you really have to consider the sheer scale of these operations. We're not just talking about factories here. These are massive, highly automated, multi-billion-dollar processing cities. They cost billions to build and millions to run every single day. They never sleep. They are continuously separating, converting, and treating millions of barrels of oil just to keep up with relentless global demand. It's a massive undertaking. Let's move to section 3, simple versus complex refineries, matching the machine to the molecule. Remember those massive natural variations in crude oil we talked about earlier? Well, because of that, you can't just process everything in the exact same facility. Simple, or what they call topping refineries, are basically limited to basic distillation. They are built specifically for that easy, light, sweet crude. But, and here's the catch, as those lighter oils decrease in global supply, the industry has to rely more and more on complex refineries. The crucial takeaway here is that these complex facilities use deep conversion and catalytic cracking to force those stubborn, heavy, sour molecules into valuable products. They literally have to match the complexity of the machine to the difficulty of the molecule.
All right, Section 4. Petrochemicals in everyday life, beyond the gas pump.
So let's see how all of this chemistry actually builds into the physical products we use. We usually just think of oil as transportation fuel, right? And yeah, to be fair, gasoline, diesel, and jet fuel do make up about 75% of a refinery's output. But the truly staggering, almost invisible scope of this whole industry is represented by the number 6,000. That is the number of everyday items made from the remaining 25% of petroleum byproducts. These petrochemicals are the absolute fundamental building blocks of modern human life.
Through the absolute magic of refining, ethylene and benzene become the styrofoam in your coffee cup. Toluene becomes TNT. Butadiene is magically transformed into the synthetic rubber for your car's tires. I mean, we're talking about everything here, from the PVC pipes hidden inside your walls to the contact lenses you might be wearing right now to see this, all the way to the aspirin you take for a headache. The petrochemical industry takes refined, specialized molecules and transforms them into the absolute necessities of our daily routines. Life as we know it literally wouldn't exist without these specific chemical transformations.
And finally, Section 5, the highest stakes of oil, pathways to international security. Because our lives are so incredibly reliant on these highly specific refinery outputs, oil inherently acts as a systemic driver of international security pathways. Political scientist Jeff Colgan details this brilliantly, showing how it goes way beyond that oversimplified blood for oil narrative. He points out three main areas of conflict. First, ownership and market structure, where states actively seek to alter the global industry layout to suit their own interests. Second is producer politics, where vast oil wealth fundamentally shifts the domestic incentives inside the countries producing it. And third, consumer access concerns. This is where states have to aggressively manage the huge uncertainties of securing enough fuel for their economies and their militaries. So, oil is undeniably a massive contributing factor to modern international relations. Which brings us to a final, pretty heavy thought I want to leave you with today. As we look toward a future of changing energy needs and transitioning power grids, you really have to ask yourself, how might replacing these 6,000 everyday items and shifting these massive global fuel streams reshape the world as we know it? If we alter the journey of this little molecule, we don't just change what's sitting in our medicine cabinets or our gas tanks, we literally rewrite the entire map of global security and economics. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll catch you next time.